will be taking you on a journey from my own personal enlightenment to a potential organizational and societal enlightenment. So, as you might have guessed by now, I'm German. I grew up in the lovely city of Heidelberg in the south of Germany, which is very inspiring, but also relatively limited in terms of excitement. So when I was young, I tried to push the boundaries, and sometimes probably a bit too much. And then I was one of these relatively self-centered individuals who were mostly looking into the immediate pleasures of the day and not really considering the world around me. And then when I turned 18, I got my first car, and I was pretty excited about it, and I was basically transferring my reckless lifestyle into my driving style, and I was probably holding the unofficial world record of how many dustbins you can crash when you go to school. And then one day, I was not so lucky anymore, and what happened was that with 100 kilometers an hour, I was crashing the 4 parking cars. Fortunately, no one in the cars, but 4 cars totally crashed, and I was fortunately surviving. But I will never forget the sentence of the policeman who arrived at the accident, who went to my window, who opened the window and said, "Wow, he's still alive." And this is the sentence I never forgot since then. Wow, he's still alive. And I dreamt of that a lot, and I could resonate with the sentence of Steve Jobs, who had cancer, when he says that life or death is life's greatest motivator. Because when you're facing death, and when you're at the brink, you're not caring anymore about money. You're not caring about material things anymore. You're thinking about, okay, what really matters? And then you come to the point where you understand, the more you reflect, that it's all about the relationships we have with each other. It's all about the question of which impact you have in this world and what you would actually contribute to this world. So then I was thinking more and more since then, being on a journey of like trying to find a good balance between kind of fulfilling these individual needs of having these small pleasures of life and being a bit, having fun, and also combining that with a certain impact and with the question of the impact on others. And this then led me to the question at some point, how can organizations, as vehicles of that, how can we create organizations which embody these things to make it possible for everyone to balance these needs? And interestingly enough, what I figured is that when you look at organization nowadays is that you have the profit-orientated organizations who are mostly looking into making a profit, right? It's a relatively self-interested motivation. You basically fulfill like certain material needs, but your social impact is relatively limited. And then you have on the other side the more socially orientated organizations who are basically a knee-jerk response to that, who are focusing on impact, who are trying to fulfill these needs, but they are mostly striving to complement or to, in a way, find a way to balance these for-profit organizations rather than thinking about how can we actually substitute these organizations? How can we not only be a response to it, but how can we be a whole new solution to that? So that led me to this vicious circle. When you think about it, basically individuals and businesses, they take from society, society then as a response regulates them, society as a response tries to limit the potential harm businesses are doing, which leads to a vicious circle, which in the end is not really helpful in a loss-loss situation. Which then led us to disasters, to recession, this whole myopia of self-interested organizations, and also in the end to depression, individual depression. Because a lot of people, I think, at some point then saw when you lose your job and you were basically focused on your money, you at some point question, okay, what was this all about? So I believe this might be a great chance for us, for all of us, for society, to have a kind of societal enlightenment, to understand that financial output measures everything in short except that what makes life worthwhile, right? So how can we get to a stage, to a point where we can turn that around? And I believe that Generation Y is a huge chance, a huge push for that. Generation Y, not necessarily a certain age range or not necessarily a certain new generation coming up, but really a mindset. The mindset of people who are thinking about things, who are questioning things, and who are thinking about how we can actually advance from the thinking of further of previous generations who are mostly, when you really think about it, who are mostly stuck still in the models of old generations. when you think about organizations nowadays, they're mostly still based on this very old model of Maslow, who said, okay, we have a certain linear progression. We first need to fulfill our material needs, then safety, then emotional needs, and then, if we still have time, we fulfill all the rest, right? And if you think about people like Bill Gates or so, they first built Microsoft, and then at some point they say, okay, and now I do a foundation. That's linear thinking, right? You first do well, then you do good. When you think about it, though, I believe that most people in this room, including myself, have a certain, what I would call an enlightened circle of needs. So it's basically, you want to fulfill all these needs at the same time, rather than in a linear stage. So you want to fulfill that at the same time, and most of us also realize that it's relational. It depends on the circle of needs of the others. It's not only my own circle, but it's really the others who are around me. So we're really talking about relationships again. And the interesting thing now is when we have this certain understanding that we need to be lateral and we need to be understanding that we can fulfill these needs at the same time, hopefully, and we'll find the way, hopefully, later when we talk about what could be a way, we'll see that technology is obviously an important catalyzer, because technology not only incubates our thinking, not only incubates our knowledge and actions, and helps us to fulfill all both financial and social needs, but it also is a great, great platform for holding people accountable, right? All the actions of everyone here in this room, and more people increasingly in the world as we're getting more and more networks, are directly accountable now. You can track them. You can exactly do what this guy is doing. He's searching himself on Google, and he will find a lot of things about himself. And it will be in his deepest self-interest to not be too self-interested, because people will find out about it, and he might get then, in later stages, a problem if he seems like someone who's not able to build up relationships. So in a deep self-interest, you might think about being not self-interested. Then what we see is that when we think about relationships becoming more important, when we think about co-creation, generating value with others becomes more and more important, we also see that organizations adapt to that. We see all these uncertainties arising from recession, depression, natural disasters, and so on. And we see that hierarchical organizations are no more able to cope with all this uncertainty. So what we see more and more are networked structures. We see that people co-create, people get things done, not necessarily within the hierarchies anymore, but they do that on informal ways, they do that through the people they know. And this is an example, actually, of our fantastic community manager, Brett Fischer, who's here tonight as well, who's doing an amazing job in creating networks as well. And he's actually here in the middle. And when you look at his networks, he's within the Sandbox structure, but he's also linked to a lot of other organizations where he's horizontally accountable. He's no more only within one hierarchy, but he's accountable to a lot of people outside the organization. He's working on projects outside our organization where he's working with other people on that. And this leads us then to a new governance mechanism, which is no more the idea of like you have hierarchical authority necessarily, but what we will see more and more is what David Stark calls lateral accountability. So that I am accountable to people on the same level rather than people above. And this has very, very exciting implications because it enables us to build new types of organizations. So what I propose tonight is that we create an organization which is kind of, at the moment termed impact organization, which is reconciling social and financial impact on the same level. And the definition, the tentative definition at the moment is that we have an impact organization which creates social and financial impact via a process of co-creation. It's governed by a logic of lateral accountability, so it's eye-to-eye level, and it reconciles by that the inherent tension between social and financial aims. Because I believe that in a hierarchy it's very, very difficult to bring those needs together ever. But if you have lateral accountability, and if you have people double-checking themselves on an individual level constantly, this gives us the chance to internally reconcile this tension. So that leads us to a certain conceptualization of how this impact organization could look like. And I believe it could consist of like 5 key elements. And these 5 key elements are taken from best practice from several organizations who are kind of, at the moment, venturing in several areas. And I believe if we bring those best practice things together, we could create these organizations not only on a startup level, but really kind of shaping our whole for-profits into these organizations. So the first important aspect is the impact mission. So the question of like, can I define a mission which is defining how I can create value for my organization, but at the same time, how I can create beyond my organization. So my organization's impact mission, for example, would be accelerate young leaders and help them have a global impact before they can become 30. So this is both internal and externally focused. What you need for that, though, is obviously someone who can really push that forward. You need a visionary, you need an enlightened leader. This is an example of someone you would probably not necessarily think would be here. That's John Chambers, who's the CEO of Cisco. And Cisco, a usual for-profit organization doing a lot of technology things, a lot of exciting technology things, by the way, like telepresence, but he's also very much into the idea of that you need a mission to change the world in order to be viable in the decades to come. And this is a very enlightened thinking. They create like the first ventures now in emerging countries where they understand that if you don't build engagement models there, you won't survive there. And I believe that this thinking will more and more come to the West as well, and we will learn from the East, we will learn from emerging markets how we can build engagement models which go beyond that. Just a very small disclaimer, Cisco is sponsoring the global TED conference, but unfortunately, I guess they didn't deem me important enough to pay me something for that, so no worries that this could be a hidden agenda. So he's really a good example for being a enlightened CEO. Then genuine values. It's really all about how can we make these leaders embody real values. I mean, I guess we are all sick of like having all these company homepages with like 20 values and we have integrity and we are genuine and so, and then not even the own employees would be aware of that. So what I believe, what we will see more and more is that organizations will create manifestos again. We will co-create values together. Employees will co-create the manifesto together with other stakeholders. We will see like what Holstein did here, a fantastic social enterprise in New York City, co-creating a manifesto which details what the organization is about and why this is relevant for others. Then, as already mentioned, I think lateral accountability is one of the key factors we will need because it will allow us to solve problems on an individual level. What you can see here is an example for a co-tweet. So you have people within an organization tweeting from the same accounts, so controlling each other, basically observing what they do, but also obviously directly interacting with the outside world. So you have a double check mechanism within the organization and outside the organization. And if you would be the one who is tweeting something which is not really helpful in a certain context, you would have a lot of people around you who would probably correct you. You wouldn't need any hierarchy for that. You have a lateral control for that. Then when we come to the key performance indicators we need for that, because obviously it's nice to have the fuzzy idea of values and of enlightened leadership, but we need to break that down into measurements and we need to understand how we can bring that into businesses. So the idea is really that we look into what a lot of social enterprises do. For example, in India there's a fantastic social enterprise, which you can see here, Arvind Eye Care, who's providing eye care to the poorest of the poor, but also to wealthier clients. And then they use a so-called like cross-subsidization process to have different prices. So you let the poor pay much, much less than the wealthy ones cross-subsidize the poor ones. And through this process, it's also, from a business standpoint, a very, very natural thinking, because if you lift these people out of poverty because they can see again, they can be productive again, they will be the customers of tomorrow in other segments as well. So you can see like examples of where you can bring together financial and social impact if you just have the enlightened leadership to push that through. With these performance indicators, we have the incentive question. And the incentive question is obviously linked to our needs and to the question of how can we make sure that we fulfill all these needs at the same time. We can see already like companies like Google and Facebook who understand how you can bring together the need for a great performance base with the need for having, for example, pet projects or others. I mean, of course, we're aware that like in some industries that works better than others, but my belief is that when you have and when you want really, really good people, you need to give them ownership of what they're doing. So you also need to give them probably a bit of space to work on their own. So the question obviously is, it's nice, maybe it works in startups, but does that work for the big one? Would that work for Microsoft tomorrow saying, okay, shall we set up a more impact-based organization? And I believe yes, and I believe it will be much, much easier to tell one of the big CEOs to become an impact organization than to become a social enterprise. because the idea for them is really how can we balance that? How can we have a fair deal between having this financial and the social impact? And indeed, we see that the first bigger corporations go into emerging markets, and out of necessity, they have to bring those two together. And I believe that in the decades to come, this necessity will also arise in the Western context. So the answer is definitely yes. I believe this will all lead to a certain enlightened model of capitalism. It's an enlightened self-interest. We understand that it is in our self-interest to be not too self-interested. And this will, in an ideal world, and we all know that ideal worlds we first have to create before we can enjoy them, but this, in an ideal world, the individual and businesses contribute to society. This allows society to be more lenient in terms of regulation, more lenient in terms of contributing to these organizations, which will be a virtuous cycle allowing to heave us to another level. And for those of you who think that this is too idealistic or that kind of it might take quite some time, there is another person who was sitting at the river in Heidelberg and doing probably more productive things and pushing other boundaries than me at this time. This guy was Goethe. And Goethe said, if we take man as he is, we make him worse. But if we take man as what he should be, we make him capable of becoming what he can be. And I believe that this is very true. If you create structures, if you create organizations which enable people to be their real selves, which enable people to bring together these two needs, which are more often neglected than others, then we will be able to create these societies we are looking for. And I think this will only be possible if we bring together the for-profit businesses and the not-for-profit businesses, not as opponents, but really integrating them into one. So this is the claim for tonight. So I hope we all see that this might be possible. And in this spirit, understanding organizations as vehicles, I hope we all go out tonight and try to become what we can become. Thank you.